Heading into this game to start off Sunday's wild card action, you've got the Saints rolling into this as the 3 seed. They've got the home field advantage in this game. Drew Brees is in the fold. You've got this offense of the Saints that seems to have picked up its momentum late in the year. You've got Alvin Kamara starting to get back into the flow of things. You've got Michael Thomas in his record-breaking season, most receptions ever by a wide receiver in a single season. You got Drew Brees, who last year you can argue potentially wore down a little bit in the playoffs, missed some action this year, so he was going to be a lot fresher. You got all these things going for you all the while. You've got the Minnesota Vikings that most people kind of wrote off heading into this game, probably including a number of Vikings fans. And that's why they play the game. And if you're the Saints, and especially if you're Saints fans, you just wonder how many other ways you got to lose playoff games like this. My God. Like, what the hell else can go wrong? And you look at this game for the Minnesota Vikings, and you're going to hear a lot about Kirk Cousins came up big, and Kirk Cousins really shined in this platform. And in the first half, Kirk Cousins, not so much. But it doesn't necessarily always matter in terms of true completion percentage. It doesn't matter in terms of some of those things. It's can you make the big throw in the big moment at the right time. And he had 2 big throws today, both, I believe, to Adam Thielen. The first one is he had pressure bearing down on him. They floated out there Marshawn Lattimore, who had himself a horrendous game. What the hell was he doing in coverage? Thielen came down with it. And then again in overtime. Like, that's what you pay the guy big money in free agency to come in and do. He doesn't have to be the best quarterback in the world, but when you need him to, you need him to make some big plays. And thankfully for the Minnesota Vikings today, he made enough big plays when it mattered to make enough of a difference for the Vikings to be able to advance. And what a crazy game this was. Now, surely some people are going to look at this and say, man, you can give me the Vikings and the Saints every year in the playoffs because it always feels like something good is really going to happen. I'll say this, I don't want to see that because then that means the Vikings are making the playoffs every year. Nonetheless, if it happens to break down that way and you're giving me Vikings and Saints in the playoffs, then sign me the hell up for it. Because while it didn't have the train wreck elements of the Jameis Winston Invitational, the first game on Saturday between Buffalo and Houston that went to overtime, this overtime game here in and of itself was thrilling as well. It had a lot of drama and suspense. And of course, because this game involves the Saints, it had a controversial finish. And I know a lot of Saints fans are going to sit there and be up in arms. What's the point of this rule if you're not going to sit there and frickin' utilize it? And we'll talk about that in a moment. But as is always the case, you can talk about 2017. The Minneapolis Miracle, yeah, that's nice. But if you do a better job throughout the course of the game and make more plays at key times, the game never gets to that point. It's never just about one player as to why you win a game, especially in football. And last year, the NFC Championship game, yeah, they missed the obvious pass interference. They absolutely did. Like they didn't miss any calls against the Saints in that game. Like they should have never been in that position to where the Rams even had a chance to force overtime. So you look at this game now, today, and you say, okay, well, if you can't blame the officials and you can't blame the blown call in overtime, what can you blame? Well, you can blame the fact that your 2 running backs, freaking Alvin Kamara and Latavius Murray, combined for, I think it was 12 carries and 42 yards and a touchdown. You needed them to be able to run the ball at least a little bit today, and they failed to do so. Your leading rusher was Taysom freaking Hill, the all-purpose kind of gadget utility guy. Taysom Hill was the Saints' leading rusher today. If I'd have told you that going into the game, you wouldn't have liked your team's chances very much, would you? Absolutely not. I don't exactly think you could say that Michael Thomas had a banner game. You look at the offense as well. They really struggled against the tandem on the edges of Danielle Hunter and Everson Griffin. Each of them had a sack and a half, and Danielle Hunter, was a force and made some big plays happen and got in Brees' face during this game. So this offensive line of the Saints, it's really, really good, didn't have a really good day protecting on the edges. And then you look at Drew Brees and you say, okay, he completed 78% of his passes. Well, that's great. But when you look at that interception he had in the first half, that's a really bad throw. It was a really bad decision. And it ended up coming back to bite the team in the ass. And then you look at later in the game, Drew Brees with the fumble. What the hell are you doing? Understand you're in that moment and you want to make the big play, but by God, you're in field goal territory. You can't sit there and put that ball at risk like that. That's a Bush League, Trubisky, Daniel Jones type of maneuver. And instead, this is a freaking first ballot future Hall of Fame quarterback, Drew Brees, doing this crap. Then you look at the defense. Dalvin Cook had 2 touchdown runs. You failed to get big stops when you needed to at key times. Marshawn Lattimore had an abysmal game. You have no idea what the hell was going on with him today. It was just bad. You let Adam Thielen go off for 7 catches and over, I think, 120-something yards. Like, you can go on and on and on. You could talk about the big play at the end of the first half where the Saints had gotten back into field goal range. And if Will Lutz said, what was it, like a 43-yarder or something? If he makes that kick, then you're talking about a tie ball game going into halftime. Well, you look at the fact that it was 20-all at the end of the fourth quarter when you went to overtime. Those 3 points could have been a big difference. The point I'm getting at here is we always do this, and media always drives this. It's about sensationalism. It's about selling things. And sensationalism sells. It's a lot easier and lazier, but easier and more profitable to be able to focus on that one thing. But that one thing alone did not cost your team the game. Now, that said, let's talk about that one thing for a moment. It's not so much about the fact of whether it was truly pass interference or not on Kyle Rudolph. I'm not here to legislate that because ultimately, shoot, if the NFL didn't figure it was worth a review, why should I have to review it again, right? How ridiculous is this? Part of the reason you put in the ability to have pass interference calls or non-pass interference calls be challengeable and be reviewable by the booth is based off of what happened to the New Orleans Saints last year in the NFC Championship game when Nikel Roby-Coleman ran the hell over the wide receiver. Ran him the hell over. You put that in for moments like this. And you literally have a moment here where, again, you could talk about the fact that the Saints gave up the big bomb from Cousins to Thielen that put him in that position anyway, since their own damn fault. They should have never been in that spot, but they were. But they should be able to at least count on the fact that New York, the booth, somebody's going to want to sit there and say, hey, you know what? People's careers are at stake. Their livelihoods are at stake. Bonuses are at stake. Future contract amounts are at stake. So many other things are so important here, and especially knowing it involves the New Orleans Saints and all the controversy about what happened in last year's NFC Championship game there in New Orleans. You would think, with that rule being in place, you would at least want to take a look to see whether it truly met the criteria for being offensive pass interference on Kyle Rudolph or not. It was clear there was some type of extension. There was a push. Was it truly enough on a judgment call like pass interference to call it? Well, Christ almighty, we've sure seen a hell of a lot less be called for that this year and in previous seasons, that's for sure. But was there some contact from P.J. Williams, the defensive back? Yes. Could it potentially be where you say, well, both of these guys are kind of chicken fighting. If you call it on one, maybe you call it on the other. Well, in that case, it would be offsetting penalties, wouldn't they? And you redo the down. Now, I could sit there and say, even in that case, you want to call offensive pass interference on Kyle Rudolph. P.J. Williams is in a situation where he's defending against a jump ball against a 6'6" tight end, but he still maybe could have gotten himself in better position as a defender to potentially get in between Rudolph and the ball. But hey, what do I know? Here's what I do know. It's ridiculous, ludicrous, absurd that in a moment like this, where a team's season, and frankly 2 team seasons, are potentially hanging in the balance, and you don't go to the booth to review this? Like, that's astounding to me. And it's astounding to me in general, this whole thing about the pass interference being reviewable, being challengeable anyways. If you're not actually going to overturn calls or correct calls or get calls right because you don't want to overrule the officials because it's a judgment call, which is clearly what we've seen happen throughout the course of this season, then why the hell do you have the rule to begin with? If this is what it's going to lead to, then you might as well not even have the rule. Because not only do Saints fans have the right to potentially gripe and complain and bitch about whether or not this call was missed, what makes it even worse is the rule that was put in place based off of the result of last year's NFC Championship game was not leveraged and utilized in a situation that ultimately ended Saints team's season. That's astounding. It's crazy. But if you're a Saints fan and you think that's the reason that you lost, and that's the only thing that mattered in today's game, then you are crazy. And I don't mean to disrespect the Minnesota Vikings here, because they should be more of the story. They went into a hostile environment against a future Hall of Fame quarterback with a wide receiver that had a record-breaking season, this dual-purpose stud of a back and Alvin Kamara, that pretty good Saints defense, and they went down there and ultimately got the job done. Kirk Cousins made enough big throws in big spots when his team needed it, and they got it done. And what's crazy about it to me, what's going to kind of go under the radar, is the drama that happened with Stephon Diggs. Shut the hell up! It's one thing if you're griping about not getting targets and your team's down 2 scores. You're a stud receiver. You want to be involved in the offense. That makes sense. But your team is winning. This is about the playoffs. It's not about you getting targets, you selfish jerk! And yet, at the end of the day, it didn't even matter. The Vikings were able to overcome that, and in the process establish the fact that they might be a dangerous team next week in the divisional round against the 49ers. Maybe giving some Vikings and 49ers fans visions of the 87 divisional round dancing in their heads again. Now, granted, Anthony Carter isn't coming on the field. He ain't walking through that tunnel. But maybe, just maybe. Because, I mean, even with the Vikings, you talk about Harrison Smith blowing assignments and coverage, Xavier Rhodes blowing assignments and coverage, and this and that, and you still found a way to go into that environment and win like you did. Where you could have rolled over and died when the Saints came back on you from a double-digit deficit in the fourth quarter to force overtime. The Vikings found a way in overtime to get it done, and that's impressive stuff. And unfortunately, we won't be talking about it at all on Monday and probably throughout the course of the week. We'll be talking about Saints fans, the Saints potentially possibly getting screwed again. Why even have a rule if you're not going to use it? And asking, how many Saints fans are going to try and sue the NFL this time?